Welcome to this explainer. Okay, right now, we're staring down a pretty pivotal moment in our history. The summer of 2026 isn't just hot, it's acting as this massive real-time stress test for the entire United States. We're seeing extreme weather events that aren't just one-off bad days anymore. They're the spark for a cascading chain reaction across our entire national infrastructure. Think about it. What actually happens when the forecast completely pushes the limits of the physical materials that make up our modern world? Well, we're going to trace that exact domino effect today, going straight from meteorological anomalies right into our built environment. 119 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, you heard that right. That is the actual projected temperature for Death Valley this June. But look, this isn't just some story about a desert getting a little extra hot. This is the very visceral, high-stakes reality of a massive, expanding national heat dome. And it's literally testing everything, from the physical power lines strung up above our heads to the concrete right beneath our feet. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the 2026 heatwave crisis, then look at how it's straining the power grid, check out wildfires and building vulnerability, explore a few weather wildcards and anomalies, move into modernizing aging infrastructure, and finally wrap up with community resilience and adaptation. All right, starting us off with Section 1, the 2026 heatwave crisis, a national stress test. So, if we zoom out and look at the macro climate picture, the official NOAA seasonal outlooks are painting a pretty intense picture. We're talking massive swaths of deep orange and red covering the west, the Gulf Coast, and the East Coast, signaling highly probable above normal temperatures. But here's the kicker. When you combine that heat with widespread below normal rainfall, you trigger a really dangerous land-atmosphere feedback loop. Basically, the dry ground literally amplifies the heat because there's just no moisture left to evaporate and cool the air down. It just compounds on itself like a vicious cycle. But raw temperature doesn't really tell the whole human story, does it? That's why the National Weather Service emphasizes something called the wet bulb globe temperature, or WGBD. It's a real game changer because it translates abstract weather data into actual tangible human impact. WGBT measures heat stress in direct sunlight by calculating not just the temperature, but the humidity, the wind speed, the sun angle, and even cloud cover. Honestly, this is a way more crucial metric than your standard temperature reading, especially for outdoor workers or athletes, because it measures what the human body actually has to endure when it's so hot and humid that we can't even rely on sweating to cool down. Moving on to Section 2, straining the power grid, surging peak demand. 30,000 megawatts. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is a massive surge in peak electricity demand that New York State blasted right past during the intense heat wave we saw on June 19th and 20th. The entire network was practically groaning under this sudden surge. You had traffic lights, water pumps, residential homes, and giant skyscrapers all simultaneously pulling these heavy, steady draws of power just to fight off the sweltering heat. So what's actually driving a massive number like that? Well, air conditioning alone makes up over 70% of peak residential electricity use when temperatures skyrocket. And man, this problem is severely compounded in places like New York City thanks to the urban heat island effect. Think about all that dense concrete, the asphalt roads radiating warmth long into the night, and tall buildings blocking out any natural breezes. All of that can trap up to 7 extra degrees of heat compared to the surrounding suburbs, which means those AC units, yeah, they're running longer, they're running harder, and they're way less efficient. Now, what's really interesting here is exactly how this breaks down. When those systems overload, the physical failure is incredibly rapid. All that ambient heat outside, combined with a heavy electrical load, literally causes the insulating oil inside your local neighborhood transformer to start boiling. Then, dangerous pressure builds up inside the casing, which completely overwhelms the cooling fans. And ultimately, the overloaded unit either trips its safety mechanisms or, in worst-case scenarios, physically melts down. That triggers cascading blackouts at the exact moment communities need cooling the absolute most. All right, Section 3, wildfires and building vulnerability. Built environment crisis. We really need to completely update our mental models on this one. You know the old traditional concept of a fire season that only happened during specific calendar months and mostly stayed in the wildlands? Yeah. Throw that out. The 2026 reality is a chronic, year-round, multi-region threat right at our doorsteps. Just look at the data. By March 31st of 2026, over 1.6 million acres had already burned nationally. That is an astonishing 231% of the previous 10-year average. And it was entirely driven by widespread below normal rainfall mixed with these exceptional early warm spells. Crucially, we have to talk about the WI, the wildland-urban interface. These are the areas where human development meets combustible vegetation, and right now, it encompasses over 60,000 at-risk communities here in the U.S. But here is the most alarming micro detail. When these communities actually burn, 60 to 90% of home ignitions aren't from some giant sweeping wall of flames like in the movies. Nope, they are ignited by tiny wind-driven embers. These little embers exploit tiny vulnerabilities in a building structure, think vents, eaves, or dry leaves sitting on a roof. They essentially turn a wildland fire into a neighborhood-to-neighborhood built environment disaster. Let's pivot a bit. Section 4. Weather wildcards and anomalies. Unexpected anomalies. You see, our infrastructure isn't just being tested by long, drawn-out heat waves. It's also getting battered by sudden, violent, kinetic impacts. Take April 28, 2026, over in Springfield, Missouri. A massive supercell storm hammered the region with a staggering 4.75-inch hailstone. I mean, we're talking hail literally the size of a CD. And in a crazy twist of irony, the storm scored a direct hit on the local National Weather Service office itself. There's no escaping it. This single event left a path of destructive hail over 100 miles long, which just goes to show that sudden weather anomalies can instantly cripple local infrastructure out of nowhere. And across the Atlantic, we're dealing with another major wildcard. Right now, we are tracking the third lowest Saharan dust levels on record since May. Now, normally, these giant plumes of dust blow over from Africa and actually deter early-season hurricanes by suffocating thunderstorms with dry air. So while one localized plume is making South Florida feel like it's 105 degrees right now, the broader picture is concerning. The near-record low levels of dust across the Atlantic mean there's way less dry air to suppress those early-season tropical cyclones. It's basically a massive warning light flashing for our coastal infrastructure. Okay, let's turn the page and see how we're fighting back. Section 5. Modernizing aging infrastructure. Proactive grid upgrades. To combat all this grid fragility, New York is actually making a super aggressive, forward-thinking push. They're targeting 6 gigawatts of battery storage by 2030. It's a brilliant setup. During the midday heat, solar panels produce a massive glut of power. So these giant lithium battery installations, which are often built on old industrial sites, soak up all that excess solar energy. Then later on, when the sun sets and evening cooling demand spikes, these batteries smoothly deploy that power right back into the grid. It shaves off the peak load and prevents those nasty transformer meltdowns we were just talking about. And on the wildfire front, we're combating that sneaky ember intrusion by institutionalizing resilience through the IWUIC. That's the International Wildland Urban Interface Code. Now, this isn't just a polite list of suggestions. It's a fully coordinated package. It demands ignition-resistant construction, like spark arresters on your chimneys and ember-resistant vents. It mandates creating defensible space around homes to act as a life safety buffer. And it ensures emergency vehicle access and secure water supplies. You really can't just pick and choose. You need the whole shebang. Implementing this code means every new project is literally an investment in tomorrow's survivability. Which brings us to our final stop. Section 6, Community Resilience and Adaptation, Adapting to the Future. At the end of the day, our absolute final line of defense against extreme weather is a mix of cutting-edge technology and immense logistical coordination. A perfect example of this is the 2026 FIFA World Cup. The National Weather Service deployed over 120 meteorologists across 11 host cities to provide what they call impact-based decision support services, or IDSS. These folks are stationed directly inside emergency operation centers, giving localized, real-time weather intelligence to keep millions of vulnerable fans safe from severe heat, lightning, and pop-up storms. Meanwhile, back on the power grid, ordinary citizens in smart city tech are teaming up through something called Smart Demand Response. This involves programs that offer actual financial incentives to everyday users and massive credits to factories to voluntarily dial back their electricity usage during peak hours. When you combine those behavioral nudges with strategies like pre-cooling your home in the morning, plus AI-driven grid management that can actually isolate trouble spots using microgrids, you completely flip the script, turning a potential disaster into a safely managed load. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this incredibly powerful quote from the International Code Council that perfectly hits the nail on the head for our core thesis today. They state, "The most responsible strategy is to build for wildfire every year because the built environment lasts far longer than the forecast." Think about that. True resilience doesn't come from just panicking and sandbagging right before a single bad season. It comes from long-term, institutionalized building codes, leveraging smart technology, and just everyday, baked-in preparation. Which leads me to ask you this final, pretty urgent question. Is your community built for tomorrow's forecast? Seriously, take a look around. Think about the power lines in your neighborhood, the building codes in your town, and the emergency response plans your city relies on. Because as the summer of 2026 is already showing us, the future is here and it is testing our limits. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll catch you next time.